First contact. The galaxy buzzed with tales of Earth, known to the universe as the Death World. Located on the fringes of the Milky Way, this blue-green marble had a reputation for being a place where survival was a constant struggle. The planet's ecosystem was a nightmare for most sentient species, filled with relentless weather, fierce predators, and a landscape that seemed to be at war with itself. So when the Andorians, a highly advanced alien species with a proud history of conquest, set their sights on Earth, they expected an easy victory. Roy Dixon, a grizzled human veteran who had seen more than his fair share of battles, sat in a dingy spaceport bar sipping his whiskey. He was approached by Primus, a young Andorian with wide eyes and an eager curiosity. The Andorian had heard whispers of Earth's fearsome reputation and was desperate to know the truth behind the legends. Roy, ever the storyteller, decided to indulge the young alien. "You seriously thought conquering a planet nicknamed the Death World would be easy?" Roy cackled, slamming down his empty glass. "Let me tell you, son, we humans may not have had fancy plasma cannons or indestructible exo-armor back then, but we had something far more valuable. A world that made us tougher than Azor's ballsack." Primus nodded eagerly, sliding another drink Roy's way. He had sought out the infamous human mercenary to learn the truth behind the legends. How had the supposedly primitive natives of Earth repelled the mighty Andorian Empire's initial invasion attempt decades ago? The Andorians had believed that Earth's inhabitants would be easy prey, but they had been wrong, very wrong. "I'll never forget the distress beacon we intercepted from that damn scout ship," Roy started, scratching his grizzled beard. "A bunch of green recruits thinking they could just swoop into Atmo, laser a few primitives, and be hailed as conquering heroes back on Andor Prime. But they didn't do their homework on what kind of hellhole they were walking into." Roy's eyes blazed with intensity as he recalled the events. The Andorians had underestimated Earth from the very start, sending a small scouting party to establish a foothold on the planet. The Amazon rainforest was their first target, a vast, dense jungle that stretched for miles, teeming with life that had adapted to one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Andorians assumed their advanced technology would protect them from any threats, but they were wrong. Primus gulped. He'd heard whispers, of course. Tales of toxic plants that could melt through 3 layers of environmental shielding, giant serpents capable of devouring an armored transport skiff whole, and microscopic brain worms that burrowed into the softest tissues, turning their victims into mindless husks. But those were just scary stories, right? Roy could see the gears turning behind Primus's eyes. The young Andorian was beginning to realize that if word got out about humanity's true capabilities, the galaxy would come knocking, and this time, they wouldn't underestimate the Terran spirit. Roy leaned forward, his voice deadly serious. "Listen close, boy, because I'm about to tell you the real story of what happened when your people first set foot on our little blue marble. And if you've got any sense in that azure head of yours, you'll make damn sure your superiors think twice before trying to mess with Earth again." Primus nodded slowly, his heart pounding with anticipation and a thrill of fear as the battle-hardened human began his tale. Earth's deadliest arenas, Roy's eyes flashed as he threw back another shot of whiskey. Those stupid blue bastards thought the Amazon was bad? They hadn't seen nothing yet. After barely escaping that green hell with their hides intact, the Andorian scouts figured the rest of Earth had to be a cakewalk in comparison. He let out a harsh bark of laughter, shaking his head. "So they sent their boys to check out some of our planet's other famous tourist destinations. The Sahara, the Himalayas, even the goddamn bottom of the ocean. And let me tell you, Primus, each place gave them a warm Earth welcome. The Sahara," Roy explained, "was like nothing the Andorians had ever encountered. The searing heat cooked those poor blue bastards inside their fancy armor like Andorian lobsters. The sandstorm scoured the paint right off their ships and choked their engines with dust. And don't even get me started on the dehydration. The heat was relentless, the sun an unforgiving enemy that showed no mercy. But that was just the beginning," Roy continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Next, they thought mountain climbing sounded like a relaxing vacation, So they sent a team to the Himalayas. The mountains chewed them up and spat them out. Frostbite claimed more than a few fingers and toes. The thin air had them gasping like fish out of water, and the terrain, well, let's just say, Andorian physiology ain't exactly built for yodeling. Primus listened intently, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. Roy's gravelly voice grew even softer as he continued, drawing Primus in closer. But the real kicker? The poor saps who drew the short straw and got sent to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. You ever see what happens to an Andorian body under that kind of pressure? It ain't pretty, kid. Leaning forward, Roy fixed the young Andorian with a piercing stare. By this point, even the thickest Andorian grunt was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, Earth wasn't the easy pickings they'd been promised. That maybe it was a death trap wrapped in a pretty blue-green package. A fierce pride burned in Roy's eyes as he continued. But even after all that, after everything the Andorians had seen, they still hadn't tangled with the meanest, most dangerous critters Earth had to offer. They still hadn't gone toe-to-toe with humans. The Siberian encounter, Roy settled back in his chair, his scarred hands wrapping around his glass. Picture this, kid. A scouting party, battered and demoralized, stumbling across a little human settlement in the middle of the Siberian tundra. A handful of flimsy huts huddled against the ice and snow. Roy's voice dripped with contempt. Those blue bastards probably thought they'd hit the jackpot. Easy pickings, right? A little taste of victory after getting their asses handed to them by everything else on the damn planet. He chuckled darkly. Oh, they attacked all right. Came in guns blazing, ready to slaughter the primitives and plant the Andorian flag in the permafrost. But they weren't ready, Primus. They weren't ready for what was waiting for them in that little nowhere town. The humans of the Siberian settlement were no strangers to hardship. They had lived through the harshest winters, battled the fiercest storms, and faced down the most fearsome predators. They were survivors, every last one of them, and they had no intention of letting a bunch of overconfident aliens take what was theirs. The Andorian boys had never seen anything like it, Roy continued, his eyes gleaming with a savage light. The humans fought back with a ferocity and skill that took them completely by surprise. It wasn't just brute strength or sheer numbers, it was the way they worked together, the way they adapted to the situation, the way they turned the environment to their advantage. Roy paused to refill his glass, the amber liquid sloshing against the sides as he poured. He took a sip, savoring the burn before continuing his tale. The Andorians, realizing they'd underestimated the humans, decided to change tactics. They sent an envoy to the Siberian settlement, hoping to negotiate and gather intel. Roy's voice took on a conspiratorial tone, drawing Primus in closer. The envoy was led by a shrewd Andorian diplomat named Xylo. Now, Xylo was a smooth talker, used to getting his way with a silver tongue and a flash of his pearly blues. He figured he'd have these primitive humans eating out of his hand in no time. Roy chuckled, shaking his head. But he hadn't counted on Natasha. She was the leader of the settlement, and let me tell you, kid, she was a force to be reckoned with. Tough as nails and sharp as a tack. Xylo's first mistake, Roy explained, was assuming that Natasha would be easily intimidated. He strutted into the settlement, all puffed up and full of himself, and started spouting off about the might of the Andorian Empire, the worlds they'd conquered, the species they'd subjugated. He thought he could scare Natasha into submission with a few choice words and a show of force. But Natasha, Roy said, a grin spreading across his face, she just looked him dead in the eye and started telling him about humanity's resilience. The ice ages we survived, the plagues we overcame, the wars we endured. She told him how we tamed the wild beasts and harnessed the elements, how we thrived in the face of adversity. The human spirit Primus listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. Roy's voice softened, a note of admiration creeping in as he continued. You could see it in Xylo's face, the moment he realized he was dealing with something different, something special. He was intrigued despite himself, so he asked to see more of human civilization, to understand what makes us tick. Roy took another sip of his drink, a wry smile tugging at his lips. And Natasha, she saw an opportunity. She agreed to give him a tour of Earth, but not the shiny, polished version. No, she wanted to show him the grit, the grime, the places where humans dig in their heels and refuse to quit. Roy leaned forward, his voice lowering to a gruff whisper. So she took him to the slums of Mumbai, where people live in squalor, but still find joy and community. She showed him the war-torn ruins of Aleppo, where survivors rebuild their lives amidst the rubble. And she brought him to the cancer wards, where patients fight for their lives with unwavering hope and courage. Roy sat back, his gaze distant, lost in the memories. It was a side of humanity that Xylo had never seen, never even imagined. The resilience, the adaptability, the sheer stubborn will to survive and thrive against all odds. He drained his glass, setting it down with a decisive thunk. And that, kid, is when the Andorians realized they weren't just dealing with another primitive species to conquer. They were dealing with a force of nature, a species that would fight tooth and nail for every inch of their planet. Roy's eyes met Primus's, a fierce intensity burning within them. They were dealing with humans, and we don't go down easy. The last test Roy paused, gauging the Andorian's reaction. Primus sat forward, his blue skin flushed with excitement, his eyes wide with wonder. He was hooked, hanging on Roy's every word. The young alien was starting to see humans in a whole new light. Roy continued, his voice low and gruff. But Xylo still couldn't quite wrap his head around what made us so damn resilient, so adaptable. He needed to see it for himself, up close and personal. So with Natasha's blessing, he set off on a little solo adventure across our big blue marble. First stop, Tokyo. Roy chuckled, shaking his head. You should have seen the look on his face when he stepped out into those bustling streets. Neon signs flashing, crowds rushing by, skyscrapers towering overhead. And all of it built on an island that gets shaken up by earthquakes and tsunamis on the regular. But that was just the beginning, Roy explained. Xylo then headed to the Australian outback, wanting to see how the indigenous folks had managed to thrive in a place that looked like it was designed to kill anything that moved. The heat, the dust, the snakes and spiders and scorpions, it was a nightmare for any outsider. But the Aboriginal people had been living off that land for thousands of years, passing down their knowledge from generation to generation. Xylo was mighty impressed, Roy said, his eyes distant. But it was the Norwegian fjords that really got to him. That landscape, it's like something out of a fairy tale. Towering cliffs, crystal clear water, and a whole lot of ice and snow. Roy shook his head, a note of admiration in his voice. And there, in the middle of all that beauty and danger, were the Norwegians, carving out a life for themselves, fishing and farming and exploring, thriving in a place where the sun don't shine for months on end. Roy's gaze snapped back to Primus, intense and focused. But Xylo's journey, it wasn't just about seeing the physical challenges we'd overcome. No, it was about understanding the human spirit, that thing inside us that keeps us pushing forward no matter how bad the odds. The Crisis Roy's voice dropped to a whisper, raw with emotion. Each one of them, every person Xylo met, left him in awe. In awe of our capacity for hope, for determination, for compassion. In awe of the unbreakable human spirit. But just when Xylo thought he had seen it all, when he believed he finally understood what made humans so special, a crisis struck, one that would test humanity to its very core. Using his advanced Andorian technology, Xylo secretly triggered a series of natural disasters across the planet. The ground shook violently as earthquakes ripped through cities, tsunamis crashed against coastlines, and volcanoes roared to life, spewing ash and lava into the skies. From his vantage point in orbit, Xylo watched, expecting to see humanity descend into chaos and despair. He braced himself for the sight of looting, violence, and the collapse of social order as the primitives scrambled to save their own hides. But what he witnessed instead left him stunned. Humans didn't panic or turn on each other, Roy said, a note of pride in his voice. No, we rallied together, putting aside our differences to help those in need. In the face of unimaginable devastation, People from all walks of life worked tirelessly to rescue the trapped, open their homes and hearts to the displaced, and provide shelter, food, and comfort to those who had lost everything. Scientists, Roy explained, pulled their knowledge and resources to predict and mitigate the disasters. They worked around the clock, analyzing data, developing early warning systems, and creating innovative solutions to protect the vulnerable. Ordinary citizens, moved by compassion, volunteered their time and resources to support the relief efforts, donating blood, collecting supplies, and traveling to the hardest-hit areas to lend a helping hand. Xylo saw firsthand the power of human unity, Roy said, his voice thick with emotion. The strength that comes from our ability to empathize and cooperate. It was a lesson he would never forget. A new beginning, Roy leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he reflected on the tale. Xylo knew humanity had passed every test. The Andorians had witnessed our resilience, our adaptability, and the sheer power of the human spirit. There was no doubt in his mind that an alliance between our two species could change the galaxy. So Xylo took a leap of faith. He revealed his true identity to the world leaders, laying all his cards on the table. He spoke of the Andorian Empire's advanced technologies, their vast knowledge of the cosmos, and their desire to forge a partnership with Earth. And you know what? It worked. Human ingenuity combined with Andorian precision. It was a force to be reckoned with, Roy said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Our scientists worked together to cure diseases that had plagued us for centuries. Our engineers built ships that could traverse the galaxy in the blink of an eye. And our artists, they created works that transcended language and culture, speaking to the very essence of what it means to be alive. But it wasn't just about the big breakthroughs, Roy explained. It was the little things too, Andorian children playing with human kids, learning each other's games and songs, Andorian families being welcomed into human homes, sharing meals and stories, and Andorian and human soldiers standing side by side, ready to defend their shared home against any threat. It wasn't perfect, of course, Roy admitted. There were misunderstandings, disagreements, even a few heated arguments. But through it all, we learned. We grew, and we realized that our differences weren't weaknesses, but strengths. Roy's voice grew hushed, almost reverent. The partnership between Earth and the Andorian Empire, it became a beacon of hope, a shining example of what two species could achieve when they put aside their fear and mistrust and worked together towards a common goal. He met Primus's gaze, a fierce intensity burning in his eyes. And that, my young friend, is the true story of how humanity joined the galactic stage, not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals, as partners in the great cosmic dance. Roy drained his glass, setting it down with a decisive thunk. So the next time you hear someone talking about the primitive humans, you set them straight. You tell them about the unbreakable spirit that dwells within us, the spirit that not only survived the Andorian invasion but turned a potential enemy into an ally. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. Because if there's one thing you should know about humans, Primus, it's this. We don't just endure. We don't just adapt. We thrive no matter the odds. And we'll keep on thriving, keep on reaching for the stars until the end of time itself. The purest threat as Roy finished his tale, the bar fell into a heavy silence. The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on Primus like a physical force. The young Andorian had come seeking answers, but what he found was a truth far more profound than he had ever anticipated. Humanity was not just another species in the galaxy. It was a force to be reckoned with, a species that could not be easily defeated or subjugated. But even as Primus processed the gravity of Roy's story, a new question gnawed at the back of his mind. He had heard rumors, whispers in the dark corners of Andorian society about a faction that was not content with the peace that had been forged between Earth and Andor, a group that believed the Andorian Empire should have crushed humanity when they had the chance, a group that was determined to finish what they had started. Roy saw the flicker of doubt in Primus's eyes and leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "You've heard of them, haven't you? The Purists." Primus nodded slowly, his heart sinking. "I've heard the name. They're a radical faction within the Empire, aren't they? Believers in Andorian supremacy, willing to go to any lengths to prove it. Roy's face darkened. They're more than just a faction, kid. They're a damn plague. They see the alliance between humans and Andorians as a betrayal of everything they stand for, and they'll stop at nothing to see it destroyed. The Purists had been a thorn in the side of the Andorian government for years, but recently their influence had grown, spreading like a cancer through the ranks of the military and the political elite. They were zealots, fanatics who believed that the only way to ensure Andorian dominance was to eliminate any potential threat, including the humans who had proven themselves to be more than just another primitive species. They've been operating in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike, Roy continued, his voice low and dangerous, and now that moment is here. Primus felt a chill run down his spine. What do they want? Roy's eyes narrowed. They want to undo everything we've built. They want to start a war that would make the first invasion look like a friendly game of chess. And they've got the means to do it. The Guardian's Primus's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the implications of Roy's words. A war between Earth and the Andorian Empire would be catastrophic, not just for the two species involved, but for the entire galaxy. The Alliance had brought peace and prosperity to countless worlds, but if the Purists had their way, all of that would be torn apart. We can't let that happen, Primus said, his voice trembling with determination. We have to stop them. Roy nodded grimly. You're damn right we do. But we can't do it alone. That's why we formed the Guardians. Primus frowned, the name unfamiliar to him. The Guardians? Roy leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he recalled the events that had led to the formation of the group. After the first invasion, after we saw what humans and Andorians could accomplish together, a few of us realized that there were still threats out there. Threats that couldn't be dealt with through diplomacy or negotiation. We needed a team, a group of people willing to do whatever it took to protect the Alliance. The Guardians were a covert task force made up of the best and brightest from both Earth and Andor. They operated in the shadows, taking on missions that were too dangerous or politically sensitive for the official channels. Their existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few within the highest echelons of power. And now, we've got our biggest mission yet, Roy said, his voice hardening. We've received intel that the Purists are planning something big, something that could plunge the entire galaxy into chaos. We don't know exactly what it is, but we've got to stop it before it's too late. Primus's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. A chance to prove himself, to make a difference. I'm in, he said without hesitation. Whatever it takes, I'm with you. Roy smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. That's the spirit, kid. Welcome to the Guardians, a race against time. The Guardians wasted no time. Within hours of receiving their mission, they were on a ship bound for the outer rim of the galaxy, where the Purists were believed to have established a secret base. The journey was tense, the weight of their task pressing down on each of them as they prepared for what lay ahead. Primus found himself in the ship's briefing room, going over the mission details with Roy and the rest of the team. Natasha, the Siberian settlement leader who had become a key figure in the Guardians, was there, along with a handful of other seasoned operatives from both Earth and Andor. Our primary objective is to locate and neutralize the Purists' base, Roy explained, his voice steady and authoritative. We've got to hit them hard and fast before they have a chance to launch whatever they're planning. But we've got to be careful. These bastards are well equipped, and they won't go down without a fight. Natasha nodded, her expression grim. We've faced worse odds before, and we've come out on top. We'll do it again. Primus listened intently as the plan was laid out. They would approach the base under the cover of darkness, using a combination of stealth and brute force to infiltrate the facility. Once inside, their goal was to disable the Purists' communications and weapon systems, preventing them from launching their attack. It was a dangerous mission, with no guarantee of success, but the stakes were too high to consider failure. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, the stars stretching and then snapping back into place as they arrived at their destination. The Purists' base loomed ahead, a dark, foreboding structure nestled among the craggy peaks of a desolate moon. "Let's move," Roy ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stay sharp and watch each other's backs. We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." The final confrontation. The Guardians moved like shadows through the base, their presence undetected as they systematically took out the Purists' defenses. Primus's heart raced as he followed Roy and Natasha down a narrow corridor, the weight of the mission pressing down on him like a physical force. They reached the control room, where the Purists' leader, a ruthless Andorian named Xylo, was overseeing the final preparations for their attack. Xylo was a fanatic, driven by an unshakable belief in Andorian supremacy. He saw the alliance with Earth as a stain on his people's honor, a mistake that needed to be corrected at any cost. Roy's voice was a low growl as he addressed Xylo. "It's over, Xylo. You're not going to win this." Xylo sneered, his eyes gleaming with madness. "You're too late, human. The weapon is already primed. In moments, your precious Earth will be nothing but a memory." Primus's heart skipped a beat as he realized the gravity of the situation. The Purists had developed a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of wiping out entire worlds in an instant. If Xylo activated it, Earth would be destroyed, and with it, any hope of peace in the galaxy. "We won't let that happen," Natasha said, her voice cold and determined. She raised her weapon, aiming it at Xylo's head. "Stand down, or I'll put you down." Xylo laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent chills down Primus's spine. "You're too weak to stop me. The Andorians were meant to rule the stars, and we will, even if it means destroying everything in our path." The tension in the room was palpable as the two sides faced off, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Then, without warning, Xylo lunged for the control panel, his hand reaching for the activation switch. Time seemed to slow as Primus watched in horror, his body frozen in place. But before Xylo could complete his deadly task, a shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Natasha's aim had been true. Xylo crumpled to the ground, a look of shock and disbelief on his face.